Welcome to High Performance Hockey Podcast. Today we're joined by Director of Strength and Performance Science for the Los Angeles Kings, Matt Price. Matt is currently the Director of Strength and Performance for the Los Angeles Kings, a post which he's held since 2014. Widely respected across the league as a barometer for excellence, Matt has a tireless dedication to bettering performance for high-caliber hockey players. Prior to his time with the LA Kings, Matt has served as a head strength and conditioning coach for the World Cup's men's alpine skiing program. It's a very, very informative educational conversation that we have with Matt. We talk about his early education and his master's experience at the University of Calgary, some of the mentors that he had along the way and how that shaped his path. We speak about his philosophy, early years as a strength and conditioning coach for the LA Kings, the current landscape in the National Hockey League relative to high performance, the high performance model, and end stage return to play. It's an unbelievable conversation. Welcome to the podcast. Welcome to the podcast, Matt. Thanks so much for joining us.
No, thanks for having me. Excited to be here.
I'm really excited for this specifically. I know you and I have spoken off air before a couple of times, had the opportunity to grab a beer with you when you were in Columbus. But for me, I think why I'm most excited is that you got a rare combination of playing experience and high academic knowledge. And I think that can be a rare thing these days. And I always enjoy your take because I feel like you fuse the science, but you also have this pragmatic application from a player's feel, if that makes sense. So really excited for the hour here to share your knowledge with the listeners.
Yeah, no, it's just kind of tracking along with you and your career as well, and finally got to meet there in Columbus a few years ago. Obviously, maybe it'll come out here in the conversation, but we had a past that intertwined many moons ago, and now it's kind of come full circle. So yeah, awesome stuff.
Yeah, it's going to be a fun one. I want to start by kind of rewinding a little bit and talking a little bit about your education. So your former years, you went to a fantastic school, very well known in Canada, University of Calgary, and you did your master's in kinesiology under Dr. Stephen Norris and David Smith. So some big studs in this area. I wanted to ask you, how did this experience shape you as a practitioner in terms and measures of the person you are and as a sports scientist?
Yeah, I mean, you can't overstate how impactful that time was on my career. So really quickly, I did my undergrad at Acadia University, and I'd worked with some really smart people there. They got me introduced into the field. Dr. Jonathan Fowles, who's doing awesome work in Canada at this time. And I was doing an undergrad study that had some implications for skating training and skating biomechanics. And I was visiting Calgary and got introduced to Dr. Norris and Matt Jordan at the time, actually, who were doing work with Speed Skating Canada. And they walked me through the facilities there and, kind of saw some of the old 88 Olympic facilities and the University of Calgary facilities. And it was kind of set my mind right there. That's where I had to be. I had to get out west. I had to be around those people and learn from them. And, I was fortunate enough to spend a few years studying under Dr. Norris and Dr. Smith. Not super well published. I think that's kind of a funny thing is they're brilliant sports scientists, but didn't spend a lot of time publishing. So for people out there who haven't heard of them, it's a little bit because they weren't pressured to publish. They were doing a lot of amazing research in-house, and it was to drive Canadian athlete performance first and foremost. So and like I said, introduced to a really great group of practitioners that were at the Oval at the time. That's Scott Ma, that's Matt Jordan, Dave Ellis, Stu McMillan, Ryan Van Asten, who's in Calgary. A real heavy hitter list. How did that shape my career and the way I approach my profession? Is these were the ultimate professionals: attention to detail, absolute commitment to doing things the right way all the time. They were ruthless with their evaluations. They expected the best, and that really shaped who I am and how I go about my work now. That's how things have to be. It has to be at the highest level.
Outstanding. Certainly some unbelievable mentors there that you mentioned, and what a unique time too. Like looking back at it now, like all those people under one roof. Those are some sharp individuals.
Amazing. Going back, so this would have been, I want to say 2005-ish when I first got out to Calgary. So obviously, we're 5 years out from the 2010 Olympics. There's a lot of activity out there. There's a lot of money flowing through the programs. Just a really high level group of people that were really committed to doing things the right way and trying to drive performance at the highest level with the home Olympics. All eyes on Canada. And I don't really know the background of how all these people seem to end up there. Maybe it was the magnetic pull of Dr. Norris and Smith, but and there's some other big names there at the university, Walter Herzog and Ben O'Nig from the biomechanics world. So it was just an amazing time to be there, to be fortunate to be a part of that group, or at least be around them and sort of just absorb the nuggets that were laying around and yeah, just like you said, it's just a heavy hitter list and an awesome time in our history in Canadian strength and conditioning.
Before you got involved in the National League, World Cup men's alpine program. What a unique experience that was. What are a couple takeaways that you think were really big rocks that you've taken with you to LA in terms of your sports science and how you built that program from the ground up?
Yeah, I mean, I was really lucky as I was graduating from the master's program there that there was an opening with the Alpine program, and actually I started with the women's team, and I think that was the really important step for me, was to jump in with the girls team that had some talent. They were really hungry for change. They'd been led by some really great people, but they were Austrian, and in the ski racing, Austria is sort of the Canada of the hockey world. And we had some coaches that were extremely open-minded to my new ideas. I came to ski racing, I had never even skied. So talk about, coming from it from a very naive angle and being able to ask questions without being, wrapped across the wrist. But I was encouraged to ask questions, to challenge the status quo, applied some of the things I had learned in school, and we went on to have some really good success early on.
Yep.
That helped with buy-in.
Yep.
And after 2010 was with the men's team, and so amazing 7 years with the Alpine program. Tons and tons of World Cup medals. We had some World Championship medals. We had an Olympic medal, and there were some really clear parallels. You're dealing with athletes that do an extremely dangerous sport. There sometimes life and death type situations, catastrophic injuries. They had a physiological makeup that was very similar to hockey players.
Yep.
They had to be strong, they had to be powerful, they had to be extremely fit, they had to be mobile. And so I had this sort of ease of transition into dealing with them and helping them prepare. The training is brutal in that sport. So the races might only be a minute or 2 minutes long, but the training camps were extremely grueling at altitude, high volume work, many runs per day in rough conditions. So a lot of that I was very comfortable with. It was very similar to how we would handle hockey players.
Yep.
The mentality, the sort of brotherhood, it's an individual sport, but there was a huge team element. But I got to look at something similar to hockey through a very different lens, to see how they prepare their equipment. The obsession with equipment I found fascinating.
Interesting. Really interesting.
Yeah. So, you and I both played hockey at a decent level, and we might have obsessed over our sticks. Everyone loves to mess around with sticks. That's the fun thing. But you imagine these athletes, and they obsess over their boots and the way the boot's set up and the way it's canted, left and right, and the stiffness of a ski and the wax and this. And so there's this whole laundry list of items that they would obsess over. And I thought about, if you think about a boot and a ski, it's basically a giant skate. And I just wondered, like, why in hockey we don't give that sort of attention to our skates. And I talked to some people here yesterday. We were looking at a skate. They were in from Australia, and I was showing them what a hockey skate looked like. And the way these skates are constructed now, they're crazy rigid, like all these composite materials, and talking about some of the nuances of blade hollow and where the rocker points are and all these sorts of things. But even at the NHL level, I bet if you asked every guy in the locker room how sharp their skates were, what the hollow was, I bet you 50% of the guys wouldn't know, right?
Interesting.
So they just kind of roll with it. And and so again, coming back to the ski racing thing, it was sort of an eye opener. Like, here's something very comparable, but one group of athletes obsesses over it, another group of athletes really has no idea. When it comes to the training side, I got a chance to really start to shape my own, model in terms of what these athletes should look like, how they should function. Had access to a lot of excellent technology at the time. A lot of things have changed since then, but at the time, some really great tools at our disposal. And as you may or may not be familiar, ACL injuries are almost a given at that sport. It's not a matter of if, it's a matter of when.
Yeah.
And so there was a healthy, I'll use the word obsession again, with preventing ACL injuries. And the common knowledge at the time was that the hamstrings had to be extremely strong. They had to be there to protect the translation of the knee joint should something bad happen. And inevitably bad things happen. But started to talk a lot about posterior chain strength and how this supported the athlete, who's essentially in a ski race, they're sort of like this full-bodied shock absorber, right? So we looked a lot at the glutes, the hamstrings, and how the knee stabilized, and got me again thinking is like, that's an area that in at least in my background training hockey players at that point, and just having been a hockey player, there was very little attention given to the posterior chain. And I thought that was an area that we could really focus on when I did get back to hockey, that there was some payoff there that we weren't extracting yet. So those are probably a couple little things just around the focus on equipment that I thought was really neat. And then the posterior chain and some of those things around how that might affect skating and pelvic positioning and soft tissue injuries of the groin and hip flexors, and just how that whole complex comes together really got me going down a different path when I came back and started working back in hockey.
It is interesting. You brought up a couple of things that made the hamster wheel start spinning in my head. There are some similarities, right? You're locked in a boot, you're locked in a skate. Now, obviously, the skate boot's a little bit more, or the ski boot's a little bit more probably rigid and unforgiving. You're essentially in that quasi-isometric state of hip flexion, quad, and hamstrings. I mean, there are some similarities. I would imagine too for hockey, and and certainly not ACLs, but I would imagine MCLs potentially, right, for the skate boot. But interesting nonetheless, and I'm sure it prepared you for where you are right now, which is the next pivot I want to give. You and I, when we talked in Columbus, I always ask these questions. I said, take me to your first year. Like, what was it like in LA? Like, what did you do? And I remember you telling me this story. You're like, Anth, it's kind of uneventful, really. Said, I wanted to start with a problem at the time, which was essentially, and I'll let you describe this, but essentially I wanted to take care of this issue with a KPI, which was at the time body comp. So can you walk us through that first year? Like, how was that? Did you meet with the key decision makers, the stakeholders, the head coach? You're coming from, now, obviously you're a former player, but you come from an alpine background. Walk us through how you started in terms of, day one in constructing, this model.
Yeah. I mean, listen, my first year was, it was tough. As prepared as I was for the job and the demands of the position, it was really rough. The team had just won the Stanley Cup, and I came in thinking that they must have everything sorted out. This was a team that was essentially in a dynasty, and I was going to come in and try to not mess this thing up. I think the team had been doing some winning despite some of their habits, and this is no disrespect or no knock on people previous to me. The team had a really good summer, and by good summer I mean they had a fun summer.
Yep.
So I come in, right? I get hired and I arrive in LA and it's already training camp. Like I'm not there for the off season. It's like I
Jeez.
walk in and they're in a hotel ballroom doing fitness testing, and it is a poop show.
Yeah, yeah.
Um, they don't care about testing. They don't care about their results. There's just a complete lack of accountability to the whole testing procedure. And my next task is to explain the results to the GM in front of the coaching staff. Of course, these aren't my tests. It's not my data. It's messy. It's messy to say the least. And I'm trying to figure out a nice way to tell the GM that this team's not physically prepared. And I think he's obviously smart enough to know what's gone on.
Yep.
So we launch into this first year, and all the hype's around the LA Kings, and they're in this sort of modern day dynasty, and we go on to miss the playoffs. It doesn't happen very often. You don't win a cup and then miss the playoffs.
Yep.
The head coach and the GM come to me a few days after the end of the year, and they said, "This is the best thing that could have happened for you. It's now a clean slate. You wipe it, you do everything your way, and you've got our full support." And so that was huge. I don't think anyone wants to miss the playoffs in the National Hockey League, and you certainly don't want to have these dark days or rock bottom moments. But it was important for me to establish some new ways of doing things.
Sure.
But let's go back to your comment around the body comp. So what happened was I was a little bit naive. I had an honor system in place, which I wouldn't recommend. Not at least not on day one. The honor system might work when there's some honor, but listen, these guys they saw a new guy and they took their chance to take advantage of it. But to say they took advantage of me is it wasn't malicious, but I put a little bit of faith in the athletes, and it turns out we had some body comp problems. We had some cultural problems, just more of an accountability and responsibility type thing. And body weight was a simple metric that wasn't being done well. It wasn't being done well by me. And so that just kind of launched us into this path of, hey, let's find ways to have gold standard measures, gold standard ways of putting information together, and make sure that we can start chipping away at the big rocks of our KPI model. So body weight's a pretty fundamental one, but we weren't doing it right. And it's about as unsexy a KPI as there is.
Yep.
But we had to get that part right. Body composition, obviously, a million ways to measure that, but we were fortunate enough to have access to a DEXA scan here, so we implemented DEXA. And I can tell you that by our sort of touch screen weigh-in system, so it's a Bluetooth scale with a Bluetooth iPad type of thing. And our DEXAs that we do quarterly now, sometimes monthly, depending on the athlete, we really haven't had any major weight or body composition issues now over the last 9 years. So that was sort of the starting point. And obviously things have grown a lot from there. But yeah, my first year, that's where it all kind of launched off from was missing the playoffs and having some body comp problems.
And it's interesting too, right? This idea, I know it really budget dependent, and specifically, obviously, not every team has the access, or, if it's a private facility, et cetera. But this idea of gold standard and having criteria on validity, like having, being accurate and precise, as opposed to being all over the scale, and it sounds simple, but it's probably the first step in being able to really have, I don't want to say hold people accountable, but to be able to measure something accurately over time and see trends.
Yeah, I mean, scientifically, that's critical, right? Like we need the most valid and reliable tools. 100% appreciate that that's not within the budgets of a lot of people. Like we're super fortunate here. I mean, yep. LA is an incredible organization. They've provided the best resources possible. I get that stuff, but we had a issue with accountability more than anything.
Yep.
And listen, players are competitive, good or for good or bad reason. They're competitive people. They will find ways. Like you've heard the old saying in hockey, right? Like if you're not cheating, you're not trying, right? Well, that's great on a face-off, but it's not great when we're trying to do body fat tests.
Yep.
So at the time, we had to tighten things up to make sure that there was no way for someone to cheat.
Sure.
We had to change the behaviors, we had to change the expectations, and we had to have a system of accountability. And 9 years later, we have an excellent culture around these types of things. We don't have players that are looking to game systems. I mean, there's always a little bit here and there, but at the end of the day, what we wanted to do is create a system where there was value in having an appropriate body weight. There was value in having optimal body composition. There was value in being able to produce power because we've trained correctly, and so then their compliance with daily weigh-ins, with body comp measures of with DEXA every couple months, or our jump monitoring, these types of things. It's seen as a positive instead of a potential threat to them and their position within the team. So, it's just, again, yes, we've used gold standard tools. You have to have those things. We can't afford wiggle room. But those tools were put in place to make sure that we could drive behavior changing and recreate our culture here.
100%. So 9 years later, fast forward, I looked here and there's I don't know, maybe you could educate me on this, Maddie. Looking back and at literally sports science in the National Hockey League, the best I can find is looking back. There was an article in The Athletic, certainly not scientific, but that said in 2015, 2016, there's approximately half the league had a quote unquote sports science department. So let's just, under the assumption, say that most of the league has that right now. 9 years later in LA, what is the current landscape? Like, how would you define a high performance model in professional hockey? What are the pieces that need to be in place?
Yeah, it's still growing. I came into the league in 2014, and it's crazy how different it is in 9 years. And we're still not where it needs to be.
Yeah.
So when you read a stat or a quote that, whatever, half the teams have a sports science department, like the term department might literally mean one person.
Yeah,
right?
N of one, right?
Right. So these departments aren't, when you read department, we're not talking like a room full of people, putting their heads together on problems. Sometimes it's one or two people.
Yep.
But it's a start. The high performance model, or the high performance department, to me, it's a collection of multidisciplinary people. And that could be two people and each person's got a couple of skills, right?
Yep.
It could be 5 people, it could be 10 people. We share a vision. We're on the same mission. We have clearly defined roles. We have clearly defined expectations. And we're working together towards that common mission. And I think fundamentally that's all it really is. Right. It's not complex. We've got a good group of people that communicate well, that we're all on the same page, and we're all working towards the same goal. And I think we're fortunate here in LA. We've grown our department significantly, but we're only 7-8 people or whatever it might be now. And I count our American League staff as part of that, because we all work under the same roof, and for the most part, we're working together on a daily basis, more or less. But there's teams that are still pretty close to the one-man band type of setup, and you've got someone who's got to wear multiple hats and has to solve multiple problems, and that's not bad. It's just not optimal. That's how I started out, but you're running around putting out fires. You're not really making progress, and you're not really doing the best you can in one specific area. But it's coming. It's coming.
The constructs or the pillars in this, is it essentially what most of us are talking about, which is the technical, tactical, psychological, and physical? Are there elements that you think are just as important that may not be talked about as much, or would you say, Anthony, those are the ones that we really focus on within this framework?
I mean, I'm kind of a macro professional. Like I always bias myself to like big picture stuff. And
Okay.
which is may or may not jive with what you think of me, because I love to get in the weeds and talk about some
Yep.
detail, but I really feel more comfortable in macro. And to me, the constructs of good communication,
Huh.
good being a good teammate, being humble or
Yep.
having humility, those are more important to me than in how we're attacking technical, tactical, and all the other sort of common pillars. If we're in a situation where we have staff or we have leaders or individuals that believe they know more than they do, or more than someone
Yep.
else, or they want to go it alone, I think we run into problems.
Sure.
And that's the challenge when you're growing staff, is trying to make sure that everyone's on the same page. That's probably the biggest challenge I have as a department lead now. And we're fortunate we've got an excellent group here that are all very like-minded and diverse in skill sets, but unified in our vision. But to me, that's the most important thing. I think I think of a department being led by sort of my 4 Ps. That's the right people, the right principles, which is the why, the right processes, which is our how, and the last one are the right provisions. So what resources do we have?
I like that a lot.
Our people, our principles, our processes, and our provisions. And even go back to what we just talked about, some of these expensive tools we have access to. That's the last thing. The provisions was number 4. So if you just have the right people, you can get a lot of shit done.
100%.
You add the principles, you're probably getting a little closer. You get your processes, you're pretty much there. The provisions are sort of that's the fun part to tack on. But to me, that's the stuff that drives us in our department.
I love it. And I like those 4 Ps. That's outstanding. And I would imagine that the top of that pyramid for you, the people, which is probably going to be answering my next question, which is, how is the model iterated over time? Is it one of those deals where at the end of the year we all talk, or you all talk, and there's, hey, we found this to be successful, we didn't find it. Is it real time? How have you iterated your department over the years?
Yeah, I think at first, because it started with me, it was sort of outlined and articulated by me. But as we added staff, as we grew as a group, we're all responsible for the iterations. And I think iterations happen a couple of different ways. Obviously, there's the short term, almost on the fly iterations. Hey, that worked, that didn't work. We have our meetings. We meet as a staff every practice day. That could be 1, 2, 3, 4 times a week.
Yep.
Very, very quick information-based sessions. So there might be real short-term iteration. Everyone's responsible to provide information and help move this thing along. Then there's the bigger conversations. There's debriefs and performance reviews. We might do that after a training block. We might do that at the end of a season.
Yep.
We might do that after the off season. So we're constantly evaluating how effective we were. Were there things that worked, things that didn't work, things that we can do better? What new technologies or new information's out there? So it's really constant, Ant.
Yep.
It's definitely not set in stone. I've been clear with the people I work around that I don't have all the answers. I don't know everything.
Yeah.
And so that they're not expected to know everything either. But we are expected to find answers, and expected to be curious, and expected to be humble, and to be willing to go out and work to find new answers and do things better. So we're all a part of this. It's not my ship, it's our ship. And the iterations are ongoing. There's some small ones and there's some big ones, but it's ongoing.
This episode has been brought to you by the High Performance Hockey Masterclass. The High Performance Hockey Masterclass is a comprehensive lecture series exploring the science and practice of high performers in the sport of ice hockey. It was designed and created and engineered by myself, Anthony Donskoff. It is an 8-part lecture series that includes metric fixation, the tyranny of metrics, reading research, what matters, going back to get my PhD as a 40-year-old, how do you target your readings in terms of digesting, accumulating, and reading your research, biomechanical considerations for ice hockey, the adductor Magnus, how we program hip health during the off-season and in-season, the Gain Go Grow model, this idea of a 3-day rollover program for high-performance hockey players, considerations for the in-season, how to manipulate that model for high performers, our communication structure within the confines of Don Scoff Strength and Conditioning, and finally, the fast and frugal tree, considerations for return to play. More information on the High Performance Hockey Masterclass can be found at anthonydonscov.gumroad, GUMROAD.com. Thanks for listening. This is $1 million question. I don't know if there's a right answer to this, and it's not a loaded question by any means. It's a question that I see a lot in that posts on the internet or Twitter, and whether it's the college or whether it's the professional. But how do we define success in these positions? Is it man games lost to injury? Is it the ability to relate with people? Is it the ability to have buy-in with the coaching staff? Is it all the above? From your experience, how do we define success, or how do you define success for the LA Kings in terms and measures of the model, your sports performance model?
Yeah, you're right. The $1 million question.
Sorry for putting you in the spot, Pricer.
Well, no, I think this is a fun question. It's a fun topic because I don't really know if we ever get to a solution here. But one easy thing is the team success, right? Like that's why we're here. We're not in grad school here. We're not here just to play around in the gym and mess around. Like our job's to help a team win. That's professional sports. That's the harsh reality. Success is interesting. So I thought of this. You sent me a little bit of heads up on this question. And I think success, the degree of success, is the delta between expectation and actual realized outcomes. So if we said the success of the team was binary and it was whether we win the Stanley Cup or not, that means there's 31 teams that failed every year. But not all 32 teams in the National Hockey League have real expectations of winning a Stanley Cup. There's teams that are rebuilding. There's teams that are on the upswing, but not quite there. And there's teams that are full-blown contend mode. So, I think GMs would get to the end of the year and say, wow, we met our expectations. That was successful. It's the same, I think, inside of our groups is we have to have other small benchmarks that we can measure ourselves against. And, part of that's going to come from the boss's expectations. So the GM's going to lay out some expectations. Maybe the head coach has some expectations. The player will have some expectations. The strength conditioning and sports science, nutrition staff, medical staff will have expectations. And I think first of all, we have to have those expectations out there. Can't be, wandering in the dark trying to figure out what we're supposed to do. But let's make sure those expectations are clear. But when it comes to the performance staff, our job is to help players maximize performance potential, maximize health potential. And I think there are a number of different metrics that we can measure that against. Of course, hey, man games lost is great. We all want players to be available all the time. So that's an easy one. But if we step it back, what are the things that contribute to scoring more goals, getting more points, being healthier? And we reduce this down. It's better training in the off season, better recovery in the off season, better nutrition, a healthier human. Are they well? Are they spending time with friends and family? Do they have good lifestyle habits? So there's obviously a big basket of items that come together to contribute to an excellent person, excellent hockey player, or excellent athlete. And how do we help drive or support those initiatives? So, for example, if we want to focus on the training side of things, can we create a training environment in LA that players want to be a part of, that they feel benefits them the most, that they get what they need, that they're best prepared, that they mentally feel good about, that they got to go out and enjoy the sunshine and smile and laugh and be around some buddies? If that's important, if we feel that environment can produce a better hockey player, then we need to create that environment. And then maybe we're evaluated on the quality of that environment.
Yeah.
So here's a bunch of strength and conditioning coaches sitting around going, we're talking about creating an environment, not a program. Right?
Hey,
Program's a part of it.
listen, I'm not interjecting because I think it's fantastic. I loved what you said earlier about, Anth, I'm more of a macro guy and communication so important. I use this quote all the time and I forget where I stole it from, but coaches are a lot like gardeners. Gardeners don't grow flowers. They create an environment for flowers to grow. I don't think we're engineers at all. We're too reductionist. We're not clocks. We're gardeners. We adjust, we create a landscape based on the weather, based on whatever it may be, but we create an environment for things to thrive in. I think it's really important, and that was 2 times you hit on that, and it was a big aha moment, and I would have to concur with that. I think it's behavioral change and great communication.
Yeah, no, it's paramount. And honestly, like, I can't wait for you to come down here and visit our space. But we've worked really
Me
hard.
too, brother. I can't wait.
Well, it's late February here, so it's 65 and sunny out if you got some time. But there's a weight room here in our facility, and I didn't design the walls and the roof, but I inherited it. But it's a room where people want to be in. It's everybody. It's staff, it's athletes, it's coaches, it's GMs, it's scouts. It's everybody. It's a room that attracts people. It's got big open skylights. It's got lots of fresh air. It's kind of a cool place. There's sports on. Like, it's a room that everybody wants to be in.
Yep.
And, of course, it's outfitted with all the coolest training equipment, but it's a room that you want to be in. And that's so important. And then what we put into that room, think about the off season, is a bunch of teammates that are all working towards the same goal, and they're all pushing each other, and they're all laughing together. And we got the tunes cranked up, and we have, there's all these little pieces that make this such a high gravitational pull towards this space that it pulls people in from all over the planet. We got guys from Sweden there. We got guys from the East Coast of America there. We got Western Canadians there. We've got guys from Finland in there, and they want to be there because they feel like that's a place they can get a lot better. And we're proud of that environment. And so let's bring this back to your question about success. The thing that I'm most proud about is the environment we've created in that weight room, and what happens in there in the off season, because it is a lot of fun. It's a lot of fun.
That's outstanding. That's outstanding. And we get into this idea of measure. You know what? That stuff is subjective, but I call it the tangible intangibles. You know what I mean? Like you can feel it.
Oh yeah. Yeah.
And that's probably the most, another thing, and I'm getting off on a tangent here, and I don't want to relate this to my experience because this is about our conversation, but I don't know how you were as a young coach. I was so infatuated with programming X's and O's and technology and metrics and this and that. I'm at the stage in my career right now where none of that matters unless you can communicate that. The perception of the program is more important than the program itself. If I can't communicate with you and get you to believe in what we're doing, none of that matters. And I know we're going off here, but it's just so important, the ability to relate, communicate, and believe.
No, you nailed it. And I was the same. I mean, but that's the fun part, right? Like, you get into your undergrad programs, and you're taking your biomechanics and your anatomy, physiology, and some intro to strength training 101, and you get introduced to periodization. And so you've read about some of these things, and so you're excited to start building your own thing and putting these things on paper, and you obsess over every little detail, right down, like, and I'm sure you're the same. You're working on Excel, like, I got to format my cells, and you're gonna everything, right? Like, you could lose yourself for a weekend, working on one workout. And then you get it in front of an athlete, and they're looking at you with their eyes crossed, like, well, I don't know what any of this stuff means, and I don't care what your tables look like. And you realize pretty quickly that it's not about the X's and O's so much as it is, like you said, connecting with people, communicating, being on the same page with objectives, and meeting them where they are, and making sure that we're moving them closer to training goals and what their performance goals are at the end of the off season. So that's it. I mean, our metrics, our numbers, is data important? Yes. Listen, at the highest levels of sport where competitive advantage is extremely thin, these are things that can help.
Sure.
You at some point you gotta push it over the top. But there's a lot of young coaches that I think have been a little bit distracted by the shiny little bell, which is, it's a benefit to what we have now, but it's also a distraction. And there's so much technology out there. There's so
Oh,
much information, and there's so much noise, and it takes away a little bit from the soft skills of coaching and making sure that you can first connect with people, and that's ultimately what this is. It's a people business.
100%. And we can touch a little bit more on technology, but I think at times now there's solutions desperately seeking problems, not problems seeking solutions. And I look back at your story with LA, and there was a problem that needed to be attached or tackled, right? You didn't start with a solution when you didn't ask the key stakeholders what the problem was to begin with. But I want to ask one more question before I pivot, and I wanted to ask the future of high performance. You've given several really interesting conversations and lectures. One specifically that I want to touch on regarding return to play here in my next series of questions. But what stones do you think potentially have yet to be uncovered in something like this? Is there something you feel in hockey that I know it's always a work in progress, right? But is there anything that you feel, hey, these are questions or questions that we need to answer in terms and measures of the performance side?
Ooh. Some of these questions are a little challenging because you obviously, I work in one team in one environment, so it's
Yep.
probably not fair to brush with broad strokes here across the sport.
Yep.
So the things that I think we've been successful in here is in our return to play. Obviously, we've leveraged technology. So we use excellent player tracking technology, and it's no secret we use Catapult. That's pretty ubiquitous across the sport now. But we were an early adopter of Catapult technology, which has really been impactful in the way we monitor and prescribe return to play ice sessions. And that's also been really powerful at bringing together the medical and performance staffs.
Yep.
It's created a common language and a way for us to meet and discuss very objective things,
Yep.
instead of sort of shooting from the hip, let's say.
Sure.
The next big step has been the integration of return to play coaches or skills coaches.
Yes.
And as much as, I feel confident and comfortable being on the ice with players, I can still skate to some degree. There are experts out there that a lot of staffs are starting to employ, that bringing them into the fold is huge. And we've been very successful in that area as well. I think the field, so let's, the rink, quote unquote, but the field of hockey. So when a player is out on the ice, pretty challenging to really quantify what's going on out there. So some of the tools have been really, really valuable. Catapult, obviously. But I think camera-based technologies are emerging. There's some really excellent things coming out of the camera-based space, artificial intelligence, 3D tracking, these types of things. So if you really want to get in the weeds on a return to play, there's going to be more and more granular detail coming in the near future here. That could be instrumented footbeds. It could be, like I said, some of the camera-based stuff. But I think there's some things coming there. But to me, probably one of the biggest changes is just having that skills coach integrated and creating a really clear transition from initial ice sessions, the progression to being almost ready to work with a skills coach, to doing then skill work, which is sort of a transitionary period to getting a player back into a practice and having some real really clearly defined benchmarks along that pathway to make sure you're setting an athlete up for success when they do reintegrate with the team.
You gave an absolutely masterful presentation last year, Scotty Livingston, the International Ice Hockey Performance Summit, on end stage return to play. It was outstanding. Like I always say, simplicity is the ultimate sophistication. I love it. You went through your philosophy in fine tooth. You gave examples, easy, user friendly, bite size, but it was fantastic. And I want to hit on a couple of these. Philosophy, if you're okay with me sharing these, there was 7 bullets, right? Skating should begin as soon as safely as possible. So true, right? Return to play doesn't mean return to compete. and our sport's very different. The rink is an extension of the rehab clinic and the weight room. Capacity, not skill. And I want to dive a little bit into those. Progressions are cautiously aggressive using basic linear periodization. Number 4, benchmark events guide progressions leading to reintegration and return to competition. Number 5, on-ice function is the end stage, not off-ice function. Awesome. The return to on-ice is the most comprehensive staff involvement of all stages. It's the most complex. There's many working parts. And last but not least, 7, return the player ready, return the player to stay. So I want to hit on just a couple of these if you don't mind. So number 1, skating should begin as soon and safely as possible. Could you expand a little bit on that one for me?
Yeah. So one thing that I really didn't like going back years was the idea of like, let's just use a shoulder injury or a wrist injury. It has really nothing to do with skating. And you shut an athlete down with an injury that doesn't affect their lower body. And then we wait until the shoulder's healed and you say, okay, you can now go back and skate. We're setting a player up for disaster.
Yeah.
We both know that skating is a kind of a bad thing for the body. And we have to vaccinate the hips. We have to keep the hips and the soft tissues sort of, accommodated and acclimated to skating. You can't lose that stimulus on the body. So one thing we do here is as soon as an athlete is cleared to skate, and that means like if it's a shoulder injury, the doctor might say, I just want to make sure that they're safe. If they fall, we're not going to destroy the shoulder again. So that's just an example, but I think it's important to skate as soon as possible because it keeps the hips ready for when and it closes that gap for when we want to progress skating more and more as we get a little healthier.
Bullet number 5, on-ice function is the end stage, not off-ice function. I can tell you, obviously, our performance at the AAA level is obviously different than the National Hockey League. But, you get the narrative, oh, he's ready to go. He's ready to go. He can squat. He can single. Very different. Could you expand on bullet number 5? On-ice function is the end stage, not off-ice function.
Well, I think it's related to one of the other later bullet points maybe, but when we talk about these domains of capacity building, abilities, and skills, and this is something I've borrowed from Stu McMillan, so I'm not going to take credit for the sort of hierarchy here, but to only focus on athlete capacity off ice and to sort of deem an athlete ready because they've checked a bunch of off ice boxes, again, is an incomplete model. It's an incomplete process. And if we are to throw an athlete back into competition because they can do a squat or a jump or some sort of movement assessment, again, rolling the dice. They're hockey players. They skate, they shoot, they pass, they fall, they hit. We need to make sure that the progression from off ice is then followed up with on ice function, and we're comfortable with what they can do on the ice. It still amazes me that there's clearing happening without on ice sort of evaluations. And so that's all it really is just identifying the fact that there's a middle layer there. You don't go from weight room to game. There's a middle layer. There's a secondary process of preparing an athlete. This is a healthy athlete or an injured athlete, but that is an incredibly important middle layer that needs to be exploited, and that box checked before we ever get to a clearing stage.
Another slide that I took a picture of and I have for reference. It's outstanding. It gives the timeline, and I'm explaining this to the listener now, where essentially it's an injury's occurred, right? At the entire stage, there's the doctor involved. At the entire stage, there's a physical therapist involved. Then we start pushing after active and passive range of motion to the strength and performance, right? And then, and I don't want to speak on your behalf, there's this idea of the end stage rehab on the ice. Then you push that individual to a skill coach, and then you push the individual to practice. End stage rehab, capacity versus skill. We're focusing on, again, and you can dive a little bit more into your philosophy, like, big long arcs, the motor competencies, the ability to accelerate, change directions. You're not immediately going to skill work. You're preparing the individual for the skill work after you've got the check boxes from the former. Is that accurate?
100%. And we spend and invest a lot of time in that slightly more contextual environment. So, let's say we've got a knee injury and they're doing some stationary bicycle and they're doing some trap bar deadlift or whatever they've been prescribed off ice, as they've kind of gone through their initial PT and now they're a little more functional in the weight room. Well, we still have to build capacity on the ice. And so, like you alluded to, we work on these concepts of arc size. So the rink is a pretty confined space. Okay, so we work on arcs. Arcs are important because of angular momentum and angular force. So we want to manage forces that go through a knee or a hip or an ankle. We build capacity. So we have to build tolerance to skating early. That's why it's important to skate as soon as possible. Let's get the tolerance back up. Let's create some work capacity in skating again. And you played and I played. We know there's no substitution for skating. It just doesn't exist.
Yep.
So let's build up that capacity. Let's start to layer in some intensity. So as the volume expands, we can then layer on top the intensity metrics. And again, with technology, we can do it fairly precisely.
Sure.
And we get the athlete to a point where now we have volume checked, we have intensity checked. We might even get into a little bit of sort of open environment type skills where they have to react a little bit in a safe way. It might be me creating some resistance and pressure where an athlete's doing some cutbacks, getting them confident in an environment where they can be in control before we sort of reintegrate or reintroduce the skills coach. And so again, it's trying to close those gaps between stages. It's I'm trying to think of an analogy, but it would be like making sure that you take each step on a staircase instead of trying to jump multiple steps at one time. There's a good chance you slip, fall, crack your kneecap, and fall down to the bottom of the steps again. So let's hit each step. Let's be very methodical with that. It may take us an extra day or two, but when they come back, they stay back. And I believe that was one of the bullet points. We're more willing to invest time up front because when they come back, they're back for good.
Yeah, it was an outstanding conversation. I will post those Scotty's information on that particular last year's international summit, so the listenership can have a chance to potentially invest in that. But that was one of my favorites, and it was fantastic. One more question regarding return to play, and the expectation here is not to give us the secret sauce, but how do you? Let's take a hypothetical example. Let's say an individual with an MCL, do you create the necessary buckets from your performance staff that have to be checked off before that individual can be returned to play from an objective standpoint? And then I'd imagine the cherry on top is obviously the most important, which is the athlete's ability subjectively to say, I'm ready to go. Is there something like a decision tree? We talked about this off the air, a fast and frugal tree where you have essentially this checks and balances where, hey, he's got less than 10% of asymmetry. He's been able to do this with GPS. He's checked the capacity box on end stage RTP. Is that a working document that you have, or is that just more, hey guys, those boxes have been checked, we're good?
Yeah, I don't think we've gone as far as to have this, written into a document or some sort of procedural manual, but the general progression is we've got a template for that, for sure. Not written in stone, but it's, might be pretty darn close.
Yep.
but there's always wiggle room. And then we use certain benchmark events that we can measure off of. So what I mean by that is certain things that happen in our normal daily activities. We do morning skates. We have a practice. We play games. Well, within a game, we have 1 period, we have 2 periods, we have 3 periods. We can use these events to sort of build out a progression. So a morning skate is going to be about as easy as it gets. Maybe an average practice is the next step up. A period of hockey is sort of the next step, maybe 2 periods, right? So we can use these benchmarks as we track along in our progressions. Now, what we'll do is we always start with 1 day on, 1 day off. Yeah, that's going to be your first 2 days. So you're back on ice for a day and you're off. And that first day back on ice, the only thing you do is skate. There's no PT, there's no gym work, nothing. We want to see, did the knee react to the skating?
By the way, sorry, I'm interrupting you, but I love it because I'm not trying to be geeky science, but for all you out there, that's confounding. You don't want things that are messing with what you're trying to manage, which in this case is the athlete's ability to tolerate being back on the ice. If someone's sore the next day, you don't know if it's your SLDL or someone skating.
Exactly.
Again, picked up with your presentation. Sorry. I loved it.
Yeah, awesome. So that's our first 2 days. That's always how it goes.
Yep.
The progressions on ice over the first week, and there's a sequence of ons and offs, okay, and everyone can have their own sort of way about going this, but there's going to be a progression. I said it's extremely linear. It will be building towards certain events. So we may want to have a morning skates worth of work on the 3rd or 4th ice session. And then as we start to get into the second week, again, this is all injury dependent, is when we may bring out a skills coach. So if there's some level of function, we want to move this as aggressively as possible. So we're not trying to take forever. As soon as we think we could get even a single drill done with a skills coach, we'll bring them out and they'll run a single drill. And obviously we'll create some parameters for which they can operate within safely. But we start checking boxes, and so volume first. Okay, so it could be the skating load work. Of course, we have the technology to measure how much skating load they do, but we can then also track out how much distance they're skating. Okay, and you could estimate that off of the size of a rink, but we'll track out distance. We'll track out skating loads. We'll track the workload. Obviously, time is an easy volume parameter. We'll progress those. We're looking at heart rate response. So we have some TRIMP scores, and we'll look at the TRIMP in relation to the external load. So there's an internal and external sort of balance. Are they trending in a good direction? Of course, Early on, TRIMP values are super high. And as they get fitter, those values come down in relation to the work that's being done. And then when we feel they're ready, we'll start to introduce some intensity or maybe some more complex movements. Okay, so again, commonly, depending on the injury, but commonly early on, there will not be stops and starts. There will not be sprints. There will not be pivots. We're going to allow athletes to just do a lot of skating in open ice.
Yep.
We start to introduce more complex movements. We start to introduce the puck. We start to introduce intensity. So extremely closely benchmarked and prescribed very, very in very, very great detail. Communicated to the medical staff, communicated to the PTs, all of the information shared daily with the full group. So the surgeon, the medical group, the performance group, they're getting updates after every ice session. Here's what we did today. Here's what we added. Here's how they tolerated. Here's what we're seeing. Here's what we're planning tomorrow. That happens every day on every athlete that's in an RTP situation. And that's, like I said, and you alluded to in one of those bullet points, these people are involved at every step. They're there, they're rinkside, they're watching. But, currently I'm responsible for sort of articulating that. But again, it's not a big secret internally. It's very transparent where this is coming from.
It's outstanding. I want to respect your time here. Want to ask you probably one of the most important questions. I say legacy. You've got a son now, Bowden, right? You've got I say this, and I say, massive amount of respect. I think when I hear your name in the National Hockey League, to me, it's the baseline for performance models and individuals that I've been able to call friends and colleagues. Just everything that you do continues to be, to me, very, very impressive. And what's your legacy? Like, what do you want? How do you want to be remembered by as a coach, as a person after you leave the game, and maybe more importantly, as a family man?
Well, first off, I appreciate the compliment. It means a lot coming from you, Ant. It's always been about just trying to do your best, be your best, not look outwardly to what other people are doing. Just focus internally and hold yourself to a high standard. And it's what I tried to do with Alpine Canada. It's what I tried to do here. And I love and appreciate our sport. I want to be someone who's recognized, I guess. It's not about recognition, but what I want to do is I want to help elevate our profession. I want to help elevate our sport. I want us to be recognized globally as a sport that's doing things the right way.
Yep.
I think being in another sport helped me adjust my perspective and look back at things and say, hey, we could do a lot better in ice hockey. So that's really important to me. And I have a son now. He's going to be 3 soon. It's wild. It's the craziest experience. There's no words to describe it. And he's at an age now where I feel like you're a dad the day that your son or your child is born, but he's now like, we talk to each other and we play with each other, and he wants to be like daddy, and he wants to do the things I do. And and this has only been in the last few months, right? Is that you feel the burden of fatherhood and the pressure to raise a young man.
Yep.
And I'm not someone who had this master plan. I didn't dream of growing up to be a dad, and like life came at me, and we have a son, and it's the greatest thing ever. And I'm now spending a lot more time reflecting and thinking about what I need to provide and what I need to do to help raise an excellent young man. And so I think it starts with my own behavior, my own habits, and the things that he sees in me, because ultimately he's going to copy a lot of things I do.
Sure.
And maybe it's a midlife crisis, and maybe it's being a dad, and maybe it's a little bit A, a little bit of B, but I've really been critical of my own lifestyle and made sure that in the last year or so changed some things and challenged myself in different ways so that he sees an example of what he should be or could be. And ultimately, you want to provide an environment for a child that they have the examples and resources to achieve their goals, balancing that off with a world that doesn't shelter them and protect them from every failure.
Sure.
Figuring out as a parent, it's hard, because I get it. You want to protect them from everything, but you have to figure out how to let them fail and how to struggle.
Yep.
That's hard. That's really, really hard. All of those things right now are the sort of the internal conversation I have as a dad, is trying to figure out how to do this stuff. Like I watched the movie there about the Williams sisters' dad, King Richard, and you're like, oh my God, this guy had like a playbook. And I just get home and I'm like, I got to change a diaper and make sure he's got dinner, and but no, it's a blast. And I all I ever want at the end of the day is I want a happy child. I want a healthy child, and I want him to be able to chase his goals and his dreams and provide for him. But it's the most rewarding experience in my life. And there's a lot of coaching. There's a lot of coaching that goes on, and so you can't always be the tough love guy, but it's a blast, Anthony. It's the most important thing I've ever done.
Our guest today has been Matt Price. Pricer, thanks so much for joining us. Thanks
for having me. It's been a lot of fun to talk shop, and I I know this isn't where it ends. We got a lot more to hash out here and a lot more problems to solve, but no, it's a lot of fun. I look forward to the next time we can connect.
Thanks, buddy.